Welcome to my channel. Before you decide that this is just another motivational story, I want you to make one simple promise. Stay with me until the very last word because somewhere in this journey you are about to hear, there is one lesson that has the power to change the direction of your life forever. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every fear that has been holding you back was never real. Imagine realizing that the biggest obstacle standing between you and your greatest dream has never been your family, your circumstances, your failures, or even your lack of money. The greatest obstacle has always been the quiet voice inside your mind whispering that you are not enough. But what if that voice has been lying to you all along? What if today is the day you finally silence it? Keep listening carefully because the answer may arrive when you least expect it. And if you leave before the end, you might miss the very message your future has been waiting to hear. In a small town surrounded by peaceful hills lived a young man named Ethan. Every morning, he watched successful people pass by with confidence while he remained trapped inside the same routine. He believed that extraordinary lives were reserved for extraordinary people and that someone as ordinary as him could never achieve anything meaningful. Every failure strengthened that belief. Every rejection convinced him that his dreams were unrealistic. Instead of chasing opportunities, he began avoiding them because failing without trying seemed less painful than giving everything and still losing. One evening, after another disappointing day, Ethan climbed a lonely hill where an old lighthouse overlooked the valley. Sitting beneath the fading light of the sunset, he asked himself a question that echoed through his heart. If nothing changes, where will I be 5 years from now? The silence answered him more honestly than words ever could. He imagined another 5 years filled with regret, excuses, and dreams that would never leave his imagination. That vision frightened him more than failure itself. Before leaving the hill, he made a quiet promise. He would stop waiting for confidence and begin building it through action. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The alarm felt unbearable, and every excuse invited him to return to bed. But he remembered the future he had seen on that hill. Instead of listening to comfort, he chose discipline. He exercised for a short time, read a few pages from an inspiring book, and wrote down 3 goals he wanted to accomplish before the day ended. None of those actions looked impressive, and nobody around him noticed the difference. Yet something invisible had already begun. Every promise he kept to himself became another brick in the foundation of his confidence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. He replaced endless scrolling with learning, complaints with gratitude, fear with preparation, and hesitation with action. His progress was slow, but it was real. Many people laughed at his new routine because they could not see the quiet transformation taking place inside him. They judged him by today's results while he focused on tomorrow's possibilities. Whenever doubt returned, he reminded himself that a giant tree begins as a tiny seed hidden beneath the soil. Nobody applauds the seed while it is growing underground. Yet, without that invisible season, there can never be a mighty tree. He realized that his own growth was following the same pattern. Every difficult day strengthened his patience. Every challenge deepened his resilience. Every setback became another lesson preparing him for opportunities he could not yet see. Then, without warning, life tested him once again. A project he had spent months preparing suddenly failed. Friends advised him to give up and accept an ordinary life. For a brief moment, the old voice returned, whispering that nothing had really changed. Ethan stood quietly, closed his eyes, and smiled. This time, he recognized the voice. It was the same fear that had controlled him for years, but it no longer had the authority to decide his future. Instead of quitting, he asked himself a different question. What is this failure trying to teach me? That single question transformed disappointment into determination. As another sunrise painted the sky with golden light, Ethan took one more step forward, unaware that the greatest chapter of his life was only beginning, and that every challenge waiting ahead would reveal a strength he had never imagined existed within him. The morning after his greatest failure, Ethan stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. He expected to see the same discouraged young man who had doubted himself for years, but instead he saw someone different. The disappointment was still there, Yet behind it was a quiet determination that refused to disappear. He finally understood that failure had not changed who he was. It had simply revealed how much stronger he had become. As the sun rose above the hills, he stepped outside with a calm heart and a clear purpose. He no longer asked life to become easier. Instead, he asked himself to become wiser, stronger, and more disciplined. Every challenge that arrived would now be treated as another lesson instead of another excuse to quit. That decision completely changed the direction of his journey. Days passed, and Ethan devoted himself to building habits that matched the future he wanted rather than the past he wanted to escape. He spent less time worrying about what other people thought and more time improving the person he was becoming. He learned new skills during quiet evenings, exercised before sunrise, and filled notebooks with ideas that once seemed impossible. Progress remained slow, but unlike before, he was no longer searching for instant results. He had learned that remarkable lives are built through ordinary actions repeated with extraordinary consistency. One afternoon, while walking through the marketplace, he noticed an elderly clockmaker carefully repairing an old pocket watch. The watch had stopped working years earlier, and many believed it was beyond repair. Yet the old man patiently adjusted one tiny gear after another without rushing. Ethan watched in silence before asking, "How do you know it will work again?" The clockmaker smiled and replied, "Because something that has stopped moving is not always broken forever. Sometimes it simply needs patience, care, and the right adjustments." Those words touched Ethan deeply. He realized they described people as much as watches. Many individuals give up on themselves simply because they have been standing still for too long. They mistake delay for defeat and temporary failure for permanent limitation. But every person has the ability to begin again if they are willing to make the necessary changes. That evening, Ethan returned home with renewed confidence. He stopped blaming his circumstances and started focusing on the small improvements that were completely within his control. Slowly, those improvements began producing unexpected opportunities. A mentor noticed his commitment and invited him to help on an important project. The work was difficult, and mistakes happened often, but instead of becoming discouraged, Ethan asked questions, accepted feedback, and improved every day. He understood that criticism was not an attack on his potential. It was a guide showing him where growth was still possible. As weeks turned into months, people around him noticed a remarkable difference. The young man who once avoided responsibility was now the first to volunteer. The person who had once feared rejection now welcomed new challenges because each one strengthened his confidence. Friends began asking how he had changed so much in such a short time. Ethan smiled and shared a simple truth. "My life did not change because I found the perfect opportunity. It changed because I stopped waiting for one and started preparing myself every single day." His words inspired many, but he knew the journey was far from over. Life soon tested him again in an unexpected way. A trusted friend betrayed his confidence, leaving him hurt and disappointed. Anger filled his heart for a moment, tempting him to respond with bitterness. But then he remembered the promise he had made to himself beneath the lighthouse. He would never allow another person's choices to control the person he was becoming. Instead of choosing revenge, he chose forgiveness. Not because the betrayal was acceptable, but because he refused to carry a burden that would slow his own progress. That decision brought him a peace he had never experienced before. He finally understood that true strength is not proven by defeating others, but by mastering your own emotions. As another sunrise painted the sky with brilliant colors, Ethan climbed the familiar hill overlooking the town. This time, he no longer stood there wondering whether success was possible. He stood there believing that every challenge ahead was preparing him for something greater. The road remained long, the mountain remained high, and the future remained uncertain. But none of those things frightened him anymore. He had discovered a powerful truth that would guide every step of his journey. When a person changes the way they think, they change the way they live, and once they refuse to surrender to fear, no obstacle can stop them from becoming the person they were always meant to be. Months passed, and Ethan's life continued to change in ways he had never imagined. The success he once chased so desperately was no longer his only goal. He had discovered something far more valuable, a peaceful mind, an unshakable purpose, and the confidence that comes from keeping promises to yourself day after day. Yet, he also knew that every new level of growth brings a new level of challenge. Just when life seemed to be moving in the right direction, another obstacle appeared. A powerful storm swept across the valley, destroying homes, flooding fields, and leaving many families without hope. The town that had once been full of laughter suddenly became silent. People waited for someone else to solve the problem, but Ethan remembered the lessons that had transformed his own life. He knew that true leaders do not wait for perfect conditions. They become the light when everything around them grows dark. Without hesitation, he gathered a small group of volunteers and began helping the people who had lost everything. They repaired damaged homes, shared food with struggling families, comforted frightened children, and worked from sunrise until long after sunset. The work was exhausting, but every smile they restored reminded Ethan that success means little if it cannot improve the lives of others. One evening, while carrying supplies to an elderly couple, the old man looked into Ethan's eyes and quietly said, "The strongest people are not those who never fall. They are the ones who keep lifting others while carrying their own burdens." Those words touched Ethan more deeply than any award or praise ever could. He realized that the greatest victories in life are often invisible. They are found in acts of kindness, moments of sacrifice, and decisions made when nobody is watching. As the town slowly recovered, people began asking Ethan how he always remained calm during difficult situations. He smiled and answered, "I stopped asking life to remove every storm. Instead, I learned how to become stronger than the storm." His words spread quickly, inspiring many who had almost given up. Young people who once believed success was impossible started chasing their dreams again. Parents encouraged their children to believe in themselves. Friends began supporting one another instead of competing. Ethan watched these changes with gratitude because he finally understood that hope grows when one person chooses courage over fear. As time passed, another opportunity arrived. Ethan was invited to speak at a gathering where hundreds of people had come searching for inspiration. Standing before the audience, he looked at faces filled with uncertainty, and he remembered the person he had once been. He took a deep breath and said, "Every one of us carries two voices inside our minds. One voice speaks with fear. It reminds us of our failures, our weaknesses, and every reason to quit. The other voice speaks with hope. It reminds us that every sunrise is another opportunity to begin again. The voice that shapes your future is the one you choose to follow every single day." The room became completely silent. Many people wiped away tears because they realized they had spent years listening only to fear. Ethan continued, "Do not wait until you feel confident before taking action. Confidence is built by taking action even while you are afraid. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens your belief. Every challenge you face increases your courage. Every failure you survive becomes proof that you are stronger than you once believed." Those words stayed with the audience long after the gathering ended. As he walked home beneath a sky filled with countless stars, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The frightened young man who had once believed he was ordinary had disappeared. In his place stood someone who understood that greatness is not reserved for a lucky few. It belongs to ordinary people who make extraordinary decisions every day. He realized that happiness is not found at the end of the journey. It is found in every step taken with purpose, every lesson learned through hardship, and every act of kindness shared with another person. Looking toward the mountain where everything had begun, he smiled with quiet confidence. He knew that more challenges would come, more dreams would appear, and more lessons would shape his future. But he no longer feared what tomorrow might bring because he had discovered the greatest truth of all. A person who believes in themselves, refuses to surrender, continues learning, and never stops moving forward possesses a strength that no obstacle, no failure, and no storm can ever permanently defeat. With renewed faith filling his heart, he stepped into another sunrise, knowing that his greatest chapter was still waiting just beyond the horizon. The following morning, Ethan returned to the hill where everything had begun. The wind was calm, the sunrise painted the sky with brilliant shades of gold, and for the first time in many years, he felt complete. He stood silently, remembering the frightened young man who had once climbed this same hill, believing that life had forgotten him. He remembered every failure that had made him question his worth, every rejection that had almost convinced him to surrender, and every lonely night when he wondered whether his dreams were simply impossible. Looking back now, he smiled, because every painful chapter had carried a purpose he could not see at the time. If those failures had never happened, he would never have discovered his resilience. If those disappointments had never appeared, he would never have learned patience. If life had always been easy, he would never have become strong enough to appreciate the victories that followed. At that moment, he finally understood that life had never been working against him. It had been preparing him for the person he was destined to become. As he walked back toward the town, he noticed something that filled his heart with gratitude. The people around him were changing too. The young boy who had once been afraid to try was now chasing his dreams with confidence. Families who had once argued over small problems were supporting one another through every challenge. Friends who had once doubted themselves were now encouraging others to believe in their own potential. Ethan realized that hope spreads just like light. One person who chooses courage can inspire another, and that person can inspire someone else until an entire community begins to transform. He no longer measured success by money, recognition, or applause. He measured it by the number of people who believed in themselves because they had crossed paths with him. One afternoon, while walking through the marketplace, he met the elderly clockmaker again. The old man smiled and handed Ethan the same pocket watch they had spoken about months before. It was ticking perfectly. "Do you remember what I told you?" the old man asked. Ethan nodded with a smile. Something that has stopped moving is not always broken forever. The clockmaker gently placed the watch into Ethan's hand and replied, "Never forget that people are the same. No matter how lost someone seems, there is always hope if they are willing to begin again." Those words became another treasure Ethan carried with him. He promised that whenever he met someone who had lost hope, he would remind them that no failure has the authority to decide the ending of their story. As the years passed, Ethan became known not because he was the richest or the most famous person in the region, but because wherever he went, people left feeling stronger than before. He encouraged dreamers to take the first step, comforted those who had experienced failure, and reminded everyone that courage grows only when it is exercised. He never claimed to have all the answers because he understood that life itself is an endless classroom. Every new challenge still taught him humility. Every new opportunity reminded him to remain grateful. Every sunrise reminded him that another chance had arrived to become a better version of himself than he had been yesterday. One evening, as children gathered around him to hear another story, one little girl asked, "What is the greatest secret to living a happy life?" Ethan looked toward the mountains where his own journey had started and answered softly, "Believe in yourself before the world believes in you. Stay humble when you succeed. Stay patient when you struggle. Never compare your beginning to someone else's finish. Keep learning even when you think you know enough. Help others whenever you can, because kindness always returns. Most importantly, never allow fear to make decisions that only courage should make." The children listened carefully, their eyes shining with hope. Ethan smiled because he knew that the greatest legacy a person can leave is not wealth, power, or fame. It is the courage they awaken in another heart. As darkness slowly covered the valley, he looked toward the horizon one final time and realized that every chapter of his life had led to this moment. The scared young man who once believed he was ordinary had become living proof that extraordinary lives are created through ordinary decisions repeated every single day. Every sunrise had offered another chance. Every obstacle had hidden another lesson. Every failure had prepared another victory. And every act of perseverance had shaped the person he had become. If there is one lesson this journey leaves behind, let it be this: never let temporary pain convince you to abandon permanent dreams. Never let criticism silence the voice of your purpose. Never let fear become stronger than your faith. Your past cannot imprison you unless you continue carrying it. Your failures cannot define you unless you stop trying. Your future is created by the choices you make today, not by the mistakes you made yesterday. So, rise with courage, walk with discipline, speak with kindness, and live with gratitude. Trust the process even when the destination is hidden. Keep moving forward when progress feels slow. Believe in yourself during the days when no one else does. One day you will look back and realize that every difficult step, every painful lesson, and every impossible challenge was shaping the strongest version of yourself all along. Your story is still being written, your greatest victory is still ahead, and the next decision you make today could become the beginning of the extraordinary life you have always dreamed of creating. Never stop believing, never stop growing, and never stop walking toward your purpose. Because the best chapter of your life is not behind you, it is waiting just ahead.